At exactly 14:30 on December 15th, 1944, Private First Class Dirk J. Vlug crouched low behind a hastily constructed roadblock on the Ormoc Road near Leyte. The humid jungle air hung thick around him. Ahead, through heat shimmer and drifting smoke, 5 Japanese Type 95 Hago light tanks emerged onto the road, their engines roaring, their 37mm cannons flashing as they fired toward American positions. Dirk Vlug was 27 years old. He had spent 3 years in uniform. Until this moment, he had never destroyed a tank. Now 5 were coming directly for him. The Japanese had committed a full armored element to break the American blockade. 5 tanks, 15 crewmen, 17 weapons ready to fire. Their objective was simple and desperate: reopen the road to Ormoc Bay, the last lifeline supplying Japanese forces trapped in the valley. If they succeeded, the entire American advance could stall. If they failed, the Japanese garrison would suffocate. Vlug's unit, the 126th Infantry Regiment, had been fighting across Leyte since mid-November. They were part of the 32nd Infantry Division, the Red Arrow Division, a unit hardened by some of the most brutal jungle fighting of the war in New Guinea. There, visibility rarely exceeded 10 yards. Men fought shadows. Disease claimed nearly as many soldiers as enemy bullets. Every step forward had been paid for in blood, sweat, and fever. But Leyte was different. Here, the Japanese were not withdrawing. They were making their stand. Ormoc Valley was the final defensive line. The Japanese understood its importance. The Americans did too. Highway 2, the road Vlug was defending, was the artery connecting the mountains to Ormoc Bay. 8 days earlier, the U.S. 77th Infantry Division had landed amphibiously just 3.5 miles south of Ormoc City, cutting off escape routes. Now, this narrow strip of road was the only way in or out, the only way to resupply, the only way to survive. And Dirk Vlug stood directly in its path. The Americans possessed weapons capable of stopping tanks. The M9 bazooka, introduced in 1944, was a 2.36-inch rocket launcher weighing just 15 pounds. It could be broken into 2 sections for transport and fired by infantry against armored targets. Each rocket carried a shape-charge warhead capable of penetrating up to 4 inches of armor at 100 yards, far more than enough to defeat the thin plating of Japanese light tanks. The Type 95 Hago was never designed to fight heavily armed Western infantry. Weighing just over 7 tons, it was fast and maneuverable, capable of reaching 28 miles per hour on roads. Its armor was thin, just 14 millimeters at the front and 6 on the sides, barely half an inch at its thickest point. But its weapons were deadly. Each tank mounted a 37mm cannon and 2 7mm machine guns. 1 in the turret, 1 in the hull. 3 crew members worked inside the confined steel hull: commander, driver, and hull gunner. 5 tanks meant 5 cannons. 5 tanks meant 10 machine guns. 5 tanks meant 15 trained soldiers ready to kill anyone standing in their way. For 8 days, Vlug's division had fought yard by yard along Ormoc Road. Progress was agonizingly slow. In 5 days of continuous combat, the 126th and 127th Infantry Regiments had advanced less than a mile. Companies that once numbered over 150 men were reduced to barely 85. Many units had only a single surviving officer left to lead them. And now, armor was rolling toward their fragile roadblock. The lead tank was 400 yards away when Vlug made his decision. He reached for the M9 bazooka leaning against the sandbags. His hands moved automatically. He connected the launcher's 2 sections. Checked the magneto firing system. Functional. Then he grabbed the canvas rocket bag. 6 rockets. 6 chances. That was all he had. No assistant. No loader. No covering fire. Just 1 infantryman with a bazooka and a .45 caliber Colt M1911 pistol at his side. The road curved slightly ahead, bordered by thick jungle vegetation. The Japanese tank commanders had not yet spotted him. Their formation remained tight, moving forward cautiously, turrets sweeping left and right in search of threats. Vlug stepped out from behind the safety of the roadblock and began walking toward them. At 350 yards, the commander of the lead tank saw him. The turret snapped toward the lone American figure standing in the middle of the road. Machine guns opened fire instantly. Tracer rounds sliced through the air around him, streaking past his head, slamming into the dirt at his feet. Soil erupted around his boots. Still, Vlug kept moving. Loading a bazooka alone violated everything Army training taught. The weapon was designed for 2 men. One to aim, one to load. The loader would remove the rocket, inspect the propellant, insert it into the tube, connect the ignition wire, then tap the gunner's helmet to signal readiness. Vlug had no loader. He had only himself. The launcher weighed 15 pounds. Each rocket weighed another 3.5. There was no way to load the weapon while standing and maintain stability. Standard doctrine required kneeling or lying prone. But kneeling meant stopping. Stopping meant becoming an easier target. So he advanced until he reached 200 yards. Then he dropped to one knee. He rested the bazooka across his thigh and removed a rocket from the bag. Olive drab casing. Propellant intact. He inserted it into the rear of the launcher. Connected the ignition wire. The weapon was ready. Machine gun fire intensified. The hull gunner of the lead tank fired sustained bursts. Bullets snapped through the air inches above Vlug's head, but the gun could not depress low enough to hit him at that distance. Vlug lifted the launcher onto his shoulder. Through the General Electric T-43 sight, the tank filled his view. He adjusted the range dial. 200 yards. Centered the reticle. And squeezed the trigger. The magneto fired. Electrical current surged into the rocket motor. The propellant ignited instantly. The rocket accelerated out of the launcher at 265 feet per second. It struck the tank squarely on the front armor. The shaped charge detonated. A jet of molten copper punched through the steel plate, spraying superheated metal fragments into the crew compartment. Temperatures inside the tank surged to over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The ammunition ignited. The turret lifted violently, then collapsed back at an angle. Black smoke poured from every opening. All 3 crewmen were dead. 4 tanks remained. 5 rockets left. The second tank reacted immediately. Its driver halted the vehicle. The turret hatch opened. The commander climbed out, followed by the driver and hull gunner. They abandoned their tank. Japanese doctrine demanded it. When a tank could no longer fight, its crew became infantry. They would attack on foot. They would die fighting rather than burn alive. The 3 soldiers raised their rifles and charged toward Vlug. He was still kneeling. The bazooka was empty. Reloading would take too long. They were 60 yards away and closing fast. Vlug dropped the launcher and reached for his sidearm. The Colt M1911 came free from its holster. He disengaged the safety, raised the pistol. The Japanese soldiers were 50 yards away now. He fired once. The lead soldier collapsed instantly. The remaining 2 stopped mid-stride. They stared at their fallen comrade. Then at the lone American kneeling in the road, holding a smoking pistol. They understood what they faced, and they turned and ran back toward their tank. Dirk Vlug did not hesitate. He lowered the Colt pistol, slid it back into its leather holster, and immediately reached for another rocket. His fingers moved with mechanical precision. He pulled the olive drab M6A3 round from the canvas bag, guided it into the open rear of the bazooka tube, and secured the ignition wire to the breech contact. Ahead of him, the 2 surviving crewmen of the second Type 95 were scrambling back into their vehicle. The hull gunner vanished through the forward hatch. The driver dropped into position behind the controls. They were trying to recover, trying to seal themselves inside their steel shell, trying to resume the fight. Vlug didn't give them the chance. He raised the launcher onto his shoulder. The tank sat motionless, engine rumbling quietly. Range, 180 yards. The driver's hatch was still open. He adjusted his aim point slightly downward, then fired. The rocket streaked forward and disappeared directly into the open hatch. Inside the confined interior, the shaped charge detonated with devastating effect. Superheated metal and explosive force filled the compartment instantly. Both crewmen were killed before they could react. Ammunition ignited in a violent secondary explosion. The turret tore free from the hull, hurled into the air by the blast, and landed 12 feet away in the dirt. 2 tanks destroyed. 4 rockets remaining. 3 tanks still advancing. The third Type 95 was positioned roughly 250 yards behind the burning wreckage. Its commander had witnessed everything. 2 tanks eliminated in under 90 seconds. He adjusted his tactics. The turret rotated deliberately. The 37mm cannon elevated. He was no longer attempting to suppress Vlug with machine gun fire. He was preparing to kill him with high explosive. A 37mm high explosive shell weighed over 1.5 pounds. It exited the barrel at nearly 2,000 feet per second. Against exposed infantry, its lethal radius extended 20 yards in all directions. The tank carried over 100 rounds of mixed ammunition. One direct hit would end the fight instantly. Vlug was already reloading. The third rocket slid into place. Ignition wire secured. His hands remained steady. They should not have been. He had just destroyed 2 tanks and killed multiple enemy soldiers in under 2 minutes. Adrenaline should have overwhelmed him. Fear should have slowed him. Instead, he moved faster. He raised the launcher. Through the sight, the tank filled his vision. Range, 250 yards. The enemy cannon lowered toward him. 3 seconds. That was all he had. He fired first. The rocket struck the turret face directly. The shaped charge punched through the armor. Inside, molten metal and blast force tore through the confined space. The commander died instantly. The gunner collapsed beside him. The driver tried to reverse, panic overriding training. The tank lurched backward 10 feet before the engine ceased. Flames spread rapidly through the interior. The third tank was finished. 3 tanks destroyed. 3 rockets left. 2 tanks remained. But now the remaining enemy commanders adapted. The 4th and 5th tanks broke formation. They split apart. One moved left, crashing into the dense jungle vegetation. The other veered right. They were attempting to flank him. Classic armored doctrine. Divide the threat. Force the enemy to engage one target while the other delivered the killing blow. Vlug stood alone in the center of Highway 2. No cover. No protection. Only open ground and jungle. Mathematically, he had enough rockets. Reality offered no guarantees. One mistake would mean death. He chose his target. He turned and began walking toward the 4th tank. The vehicle pushed through thick vegetation 20 yards off the road. Jungle growth slowed its movement. Branches scraped against its steel hull. Its suspension struggled over uneven terrain. The Type 95's bell crank suspension system provided mobility, but it also caused instability. The tank rocked violently as it advanced, its gun barrel swaying unpredictably. The hull gunner opened fire. Machine gun rounds tore through leaves and branches. But the tank was moving. And so was Vlug. The gunner could not aim accurately. At 25 yards, Vlug stopped. He dropped to one knee and loaded another rocket. The tank began turning toward him. Its turret rotated slowly, driven by manual hand crank. The commander was shouting inside. Desperate. He knew what was coming. Vlug went prone, resting the bazooka across a fallen log. He aimed at the tank's side armor. 6mm thick. Paper against shaped charge. The turret was seconds away from aligning. He fired. The rocket struck just below the turret ring. The shaped charge penetrated instantly. Inside, ammunition detonated in a catastrophic chain reaction. The hull ruptured. The turret blasted skyward, spinning through the air before crashing to the ground 15 feet away. The 4th tank was destroyed. 2 rockets remained. 1 enemy vehicle still alive. The 5th Type 95 had halted deep in the vegetation to the right of the road. Its commander had watched everything. He had seen 4 armored vehicles destroyed by a single man. He chose concealment. The engine shut down. Silence fell. The tank disappeared into the jungle. Vlug stood still, scanning the dense foliage. No sound. No movement. The enemy was hiding. Preparing. Waiting for him to expose himself. He began walking along the right edge of the road, eyes searching for any sign. Broken branches. Disturbed earth. Exhaust residue. Nothing. 50 yards. 100 yards. Still nothing. The jungle rose 8 feet high around him. Visibility extended barely 30 yards into the vegetation. The tank could be anywhere. If it ambushed him first, the fight would end instantly. He continued forward. Then he saw it. 30 yards into the jungle. A mistake. The rear machine gun barrel protruded slightly above the vegetation. A small detail, but unmistakable. The tank was there. Vlug stepped off the road and moved silently through the jungle, circling behind it. The crew remained motionless, unaware. They were waiting for him to pass. He stopped 20 yards from the vehicle. Now he could see it clearly. The camouflage was effective. Hull partially hidden. Turret concealed beneath branches. But not enough. He loaded his 5th rocket. Aimed at the rear armor. The engine compartment. The weakest point. At precisely 14:38, For minutes and 20 seconds after stepping onto the road, Vlug fired. The rocket struck the rear hull. The shaped charge penetrated cleanly. Inside, the diesel engine ignited instantly. Fuel lines ruptured. Flames spread rapidly. The driver tried to escape. He opened the hatch and attempted to climb out, but smoke overwhelmed him before he could clear the vehicle. The commander and gunner never escaped. The fifth tank burned where it stood. The battle was over. Vlug stood alone in the jungle. One rocket remained unused. He turned and walked back to Highway 2. 5 Japanese tanks lay destroyed along 300 yards of road. Columns of black smoke rose into the sky. Other American soldiers emerged cautiously from their positions, staring at the wreckage, and at the man who had done it alone. They had watched everything. From behind the sandbags of the roadblock, American soldiers had witnessed the entire engagement unfold in stunned silence. They had seen Private First Class Dirk Vlug step out onto Highway 2 alone. They had watched him walk directly toward 5 advancing Japanese tanks. They had counted each rocket. They had seen the explosions. And they had waited for him to die. But he didn't. Sergeant Leroy Johnson was the first to reach him. Johnson had been positioned nearly 400 yards north, manning another defensive section. When the gunfire and explosions began, he had sprinted down the road, expecting the worst. He had expected to find shattered American defenses and Japanese armor pushing forward. Instead, he found Dirk Vlug standing calmly on the road. The bazooka rested on his shoulder. Behind him, 5 Japanese tanks burned in scattered ruin. One rocket remained and used in his bag. Other American soldiers emerged cautiously from cover, disbelief written on their faces. They approached the destroyed Type 95 tanks, inspecting the wreckage, confirming kills. Blackened steel hulls still radiated heat. Turrets lay torn free and scattered across the ground. Every crewman inside was dead. One soldier carried a Kodak 35 field camera. He photographed Vlug standing beside the destroyed armor, documenting what seemed almost impossible. Those images would later appear in the pages of Stars and Stripes, the official newspaper of the United States Army. Proof of what one man had done. Private Victor Meinberg of the 129th Field Artillery Battalion had also witnessed the fight. Assigned to a forward observer team near the roadblock, Meinberg had moved ammunition during the battle, supporting bazooka teams under fire. He had seen Vlug's solitary advance. Meinberg would later receive the Bronze Star for his actions that day. But Vlug had fought alone. 15 Japanese tank crewmen had been sent to break through the American line. None survived. 3 were killed when they attempted to attack on foot. 12 died inside their tanks when shaped charge warheads penetrated their armor and ignited ammunition and fuel. American casualties at the roadblock. 0. The tactical impact was immediate. The Japanese had committed their armored force to reopen Highway 2. Those tanks were meant to reinforce Ormoc Bay, sustain the Japanese 35th Army, and preserve their final supply route. Instead, they became obstacles. Burning wreckage blocked the road. Japanese reinforcements could no longer move north. American forces could now advance south. The 126th Infantry Regiment pushed forward that same afternoon, encountering significantly weaker resistance. Without armored support, Japanese infantry positions became vulnerable. Word spread quickly. At first, officers refused to believe it. A single private destroying 5 tanks was beyond expectation. Verification was ordered. Officers were dispatched to the site. They counted 5 destroyed tanks, interviewed witnesses, examined Vlug's bazooka. 5 rockets fired, 1 rocket remaining. The evidence was undeniable. But destroying tanks alone was not enough to qualify for the Medal of Honor. The action had to accomplish something greater. It had to change the course of battle. It had. The destroyed tanks had preserved the roadblock. They enabled continued American advance. They prevented Japanese armored interference with the broader assault on Ormoc. Lieutenant Colonel Ferdinand Zara, the battalion commander, began preparing the official after-action report that very day. The report included witness statements, photographic evidence, and a formal recommendation for the nation's highest military decoration. But the battle for Leyte was far from over. 3 days later, on December 18th, the 77th Infantry Division captured Valencia Airfield, 7 miles north of Ormoc. American forces linked up, closing the northern escape routes. The Japanese 35th Army was trapped. The valley was sealed. Still, the fighting continued. Dense jungle terrain made every advance costly. Visibility often dropped below 20 yards. Japanese defenders constructed fortified positions using heavy timber, reinforced trenches, and interlocking defensive networks. Each position had to be destroyed at close range. Flamethrowers, grenades, bayonets. The 126th Infantry Regiment fought continuously for 10 days following Vlug's action. No rest, no rotation. Companies that began with 160 men were reduced to fewer than 80. Officers fell. Sergeants assumed command. Corporals led what remained. But the roadblock held. The Japanese never again attempted an armored breakthrough on Highway 2. They never reclaimed the ground Vlug had defended. American forces tightened their control over Ormoc Valley. Japanese units south of the roadblock became isolated, unable to retreat, unable to resupply, unable to reinforce. On December 21st, American forces completed the link-up near Valencia. The corridor from Breakneck Ridge to Ormoc Bay was now fully under U.S. control. The Japanese 35th Army was divided. Its defeat became inevitable. General Tomoyuki Yamashita had committed massive forces to defend Leyte. Reinforcements from across the Philippines had been sent to hold the valley at any cost. But American control of Highway 2 made their position untenable. By December 25th, organized Japanese resistance collapsed. Survivors fled into the mountains. Many never emerged. Japanese losses on Leyte exceeded 49,000 killed, many from starvation and disease after being cut off. American losses were also severe. 3,596 killed, 12,000 wounded. The 32nd Division alone suffered 3,000 casualties. But the island was secured. On December 26, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur declared Leyte liberated. The island became a critical staging ground for future operations, including the invasion of Luzon. The war would continue. So would Dirk Vlug. He remained with his unit, still a private first class. He stood guard. He patrolled. He fought alongside the same men. No special privileges. No special treatment. The Medal of Honor recommendation moved slowly through military channels. But among the soldiers of the 32nd Division, his actions were never forgotten. He had not sought recognition. He had simply done what needed to be done, when it needed to be done. In February 1945, the 32nd Division redeployed to Mindanao for continued operations. Vlug went with them. Combat continued through the spring. In Europe, the war ended on May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. But in the Pacific, the war was still raging. Japan remained undefeated. Plans were already underway for the invasion of the Japanese home islands. Casualty projections were staggering. Hundreds of thousands. Possibly over 1 million American dead and wounded. The war was not finished. But on one road in Leyte, on one afternoon in December 1944, a single American soldier had changed its course. Dirk Vlug was supposed to invade Japan. By mid-1945, American military planners were preparing the largest amphibious assault in history. Millions of Allied troops were being assembled. Casualty projections were staggering. Hundreds of thousands, possibly over 1 million American soldiers killed or wounded. Private First Class Dirk J. Vlug was scheduled to be among them. But in June 1945, his orders changed. A telegram arrived at division headquarters on Mindanao. It did not assign him to another combat unit. It did not send him to another battlefield. It sent him home. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor had been moving through military channels for 6 months. Each level of command had examined the reports in detail. Battalion commanders submitted witness statements. Regimental and division officers reviewed photographs. 6th Army Headquarters forwarded the recommendation to General Douglas MacArthur's command in Manila. From Manila, it was sent to Washington. At the War Department, officials reviewed hundreds of Medal of Honor nominations from the Pacific Theater. During the entire war, approximately 400 recommendations were submitted from that theater alone. Only 81 were approved. The standards were uncompromising. The action had to demonstrate extraordinary bravery beyond the call of duty. It had to involve clear and undeniable risk of death. And it had to accomplish a decisive military objective. Vlug's actions met every requirement. On June 14, 1945, he was honorably discharged at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. His military record listed over 3 years of active service. Combat operations in New Guinea. Leyte, Mindanao. Awards pending. Medal of Honor. Japan surrendered 2 months later, on August 15, 1945. The invasion he had expected to fight in never happened. Atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan's capitulation, ending the war without the catastrophic casualties that had been predicted. Dirk Vlug returned home to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Before the war, he had been an ordinary civilian in an industrial city of 176,000 people. He had enlisted in April 1941, months before Pearl Harbor. He had left as a young man of 24. He returned at 28, a combat veteran, a survivor, and soon, a Medal of Honor recipient. Grand Rapids had never produced one before. The city prepared a celebration. Donations were collected from residents. The community raised enough money to build and furnish a house for him, a permanent symbol of their gratitude. On June 7, 1946, Dirk Vlug stood inside the White House. President Harry S. Truman personally presented the nation's highest military decoration. The citation was read aloud. It described one soldier advancing alone under intense enemy fire. It described the destruction of 5 enemy tanks. It described courage beyond expectation. Then President Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. A light blue ribbon, a bronze star surrounded by a wreath. Recognition of heroism at the highest level. Vlug became one of 464 recipients awarded the Medal of Honor during World War II, one of only 81 from the Pacific Theater. He returned home to Grand Rapids, where thousands of citizens lined the streets. He rode through the city in an open car as crowds cheered. The celebration lasted 3 days. Then, gradually, the attention faded. That was exactly how he wanted it. He did not seek fame. He did not seek recognition. He sought normal life. He joined the United States Postal Service. He became a mail carrier, walking the streets of Grand Rapids, delivering letters and packages. No artillery, no tanks, no incoming fire, just routine. In 1949, he joined the Michigan Army National Guard. He was promoted to Master Sergeant. He trained younger soldiers. He taught them how to operate rocket launchers. He never told them that he had destroyed 5 tanks himself. He simply taught the procedure. Load the weapon properly. Acquire the sight picture. Fire. He retired from military service in 1951. He returned fully to civilian life. For 40 years, he delivered mail. He married, raised a family, attended church, lived quietly. The war became something he did not discuss. The bazooka he had used on Highway 2 was never recovered. It disappeared into the jungles of the Philippines, lost to rust and time. But the photographs remained. Black and white images taken on December 15, 1944. Dirk Vlug standing beside the destroyed tanks. Evidence preserved in the National Archives. Military historians studied them. Armor specialists analyzed them. They examined penetration patterns. They calculated firing angles. They tried to understand how one infantryman had destroyed 5 armored vehicles alone. The explanation required no analysis. He had seen what needed to be done, and he had done it. On June 25, 1996, Dirk J. Vlug died in Grand Rapids. He was 79 years old. More than half a century had passed since the afternoon he stood alone on Highway 2. He was buried with full military honors. His Medal of Honor was displayed at his funeral. His obituary was brief. It mentioned his service. It mentioned his career. It mentioned his family. It did not fully describe what he had done. The road where he fought has long since changed. Highway 2 has been repaved. The jungle has reclaimed the ground where 5 tanks once burned. No monument marks the exact spot. But the records remain. The citation, the photographs, the reports, the testimony. Proof that on one afternoon in December 1944, one American soldier stopped an armored assault alone. He never asked to be remembered. But history remembers him anyway.